On the information side of things, we have content requirements. And content, of course, is the reason people are coming to your site or using your app or your system in the first place. All the stuff that they can read, consume, absorb, interact with is essentially content. And as such, there are a lot of different types of content. While we typically think of content as text-based, images, audio, and video are also all content types, and they're all things that have to be considered. Because in many cases, all these different content types wind up working together in order to fulfill a single requirement or a single feature specification. For example, an article that you read online, aside from just the text, may also have photos accompanying it, may have video clips accompanying it, a how-to section or a help section in a system that you use at work may very well have audio or video or diagrams or, things that help you understand the content. So content is sort of the sum total of everything that shows up on the screen. If we know what the different content types are associated with each feature, we're able to determine what resources we need to produce that content, or in some cases, whether we can even produce it at all. So in that way, content has major impact on user experience design decisions. And first in line is the content's format and its purpose. And those are two very different things. A really good example of that comes from Jesse James Garrett's book, The Elements of User Experience, where he says that, when discussing content requirements with stakeholders, one of the first things that's usually said is we should have FAQs. But in that light, when the person says FAQ, they're really only referring to format, content format, a simple series of questions and answers. However, the real value that's provided by an FAQ is the fact that it provides easy access to commonly needed information. That is its purpose, okay? Very different. Other content requirements can fulfill that same purpose, but when the focus is on the format, the purpose itself can be forgotten, right? It's easy to sort of forget why it's there in the first place. And more often than not, FAQs tend to neglect the quote-unquote frequently part of the equation, and instead you get sort of answers to whatever questions the provider just happened to think of. And that's why a lot of times you go into the help section or the FAQ section, and a lot of what you find there really doesn't help you do anything. That's because the focus in creating that content was squarely on format as opposed to purpose. The next thing we have to consider is the size of each feature. What's our word count? How much text do we have to support? If it's an image, what are the pixel dimensions of each image? Are there multiple sizes of images? How are we going to browse them? How are we going to collect them? What can people do with them once they're there? How big is each image, right? If we're streaming audio or video, what kind of bandwidth is required? Will the hosting service support it? Will our internal server support that load? Will it support multiple connections, thousands of connections at the same time, whatever the case may be? So how does size impact what we design and what we build? How do we work that into our specs? The last thing is, what resources do we need in order to produce each type of content? Okay, for text, obviously, you need writers, whether it's a professional writer or whether it's just somebody within the company who's tasked with writing down all this information and getting it, to the project team. Someone has to do the writing. In the case of images, someone either has to create those images or someone has to go to a stock photo site, pick out a bunch of images that they feel are suitable, purchase them, and then hand them off to the project team, who probably then has to optimize them, crop them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. For audio, for video, who's going to create this stuff? And then once it's created, where do we store it? Is it on our server? Is it somewhere else? Do we need to purchase a third-party service in order to serve up this content? Okay, so every single piece of content that we decide to include has ramifications. There are resource considerations that have to be made. Just like many of the other items and elements that we've discussed so far, content should be strategic. In addition to just serving a functional purpose, a tactical purpose, it should be leveraged in some strategic way to serve a goal, to deliver a specific message to end users, to make them feel a certain way, to give them the information that they're desperately looking for. So because it's strategic, it means that there are certain considerations that have to be taken into account when we're in the phase of developing content and thinking about what kinds of content we're going to have. And most of those considerations revolve around the idea of content being relevant and appropriate. Is it relevant to the reason that people have come to see us or to interact with our product in the first place? Is it relevant to our reason for being? Is it appropriate in terms of representing who we are and what we believe in and what we have to offer? Is it appropriate in terms of speaking the language of the customer on the receiving end? Are they going to get what they read? Are they going to identify with it? Is it going to mean something to them? Is it going to, cause them to stick around a little bit longer and maybe dig a little deeper? So the degree of relevance and the degree of appropriateness hinges on different things, such as the method of delivery. How are we going to deliver content? Is it just text that sits on the screen and people read it and absorb it? Is it a moving animation that tells the story? Is it some combination of audio and video? Do they watch it on the screen? Do they download it and watch it later? Do they save it to their phone and watch it? Okay, what's the method of delivery? How are we getting it to the audience? The second consideration in terms of being appropriate is its style and its structure. In terms of style, is it consistent with the message that we're putting out everywhere else? Is it consistent in terms of theme, tone of voice, in terms of factual information? Is it telling the truth? Is it appropriate? Is it casual and relaxed? Is it formal and strict? Is it rigid? Is it cultured? Is it hip? Is it, what's its style? And is that style appropriate both for the business and the audience? And is the structure appropriate as well? The way that it's organized, the way that it flows, the way that it's categorized or organized or prioritized, the physical structure of it, whether it's audio or video or text, right? Which is most appropriate, and how are we going to structure the information in each one of those cases? And finally, you have to think about substance. Is this information going to really be useful or valuable or meaningful to the people that consume it? Is it telling them something that's of dire importance, something we really want them to know, or something that they need to know? Or is it what Steve Krug calls happy talk? Is it, we are a leading provider of blah, 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 okay? Is it all about you, or is it all about them? Are you talking about yourself for 20 minutes, or are you explaining to the viewer what's in it for them for 20 minutes? One of those two things is infinitely more valuable than the other from a user experience point of view. But most content tends to be very one-sided. People sort of forget that your job is not to tell people how great you are or what you've accomplished or how long you've been in business or what your position in the marketplace is. Your job is to tell them why any of that matters to them. Okay? What's in it for me? That's the thing you got to remember. The process of generating content requirements starts with identifying and validating content sources and the appropriateness of each source. So, first and foremost, we have to identify content